She would pray the Our Father, and she really struggled with the part where it says, "Thy kingdom come, thy will be done." She got to the point where it was hard for her to say "thy will be done" because she understood the power of those words. Where you're saying, if you're praying that prayer and you say "thy will be done," you're saying to God, "Okay, I want to try and match your will." And she understood that, but she didn't want her daughter to be gone. She didn't want her husband to be gone. So let's just take a moment and just consider God's presence with us here this evening. Heavenly Father, we are grateful to you for the ability to gather in safety, to be here in your presence, with you in the tabernacle, but also just with you here amongst us, because as you said, where two or three are gathered in my name, I am in their midst. So we appreciate you being here with us tonight. We ask that you just open our hearts and open our minds to, there's at least one thing that you want all of us to take away from us tonight. So just open our hearts and minds to what that one thing is. Be with us, and we ask that you send St. Elizabeth to be with us tonight to help us learn more about her life and how we can apply it to our own. We ask this in Jesus' name, amen. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen. So tonight's saint that we're going to talk about is St. Elizabeth Ann Seton. And you may have heard of her, you may not have. You may recognize the name Seton, S-E-T-O-N. There's a college out in New Jersey, a university out in New Jersey called Seton Hall. And it's named after her. I believe it was started by her nephew and named it after his aunt, who they knew was going to be a saint someday. Elizabeth was born in New York City in 1774, so around the time really close to when the American Revolution was going on. She was born into money. Her dad was a surgeon, and her mother also kind of grew up in high society, and so they grew up well. She is the second child. When she was about 3 years old, her mother had the youngest daughter, but she died really close to after the child was born. And within a year, that baby died as well. And so at the age of 3, Elizabeth has lost her mother. Her father, again, who was a surgeon and he was pretty successful, he remarried. It wasn't immediately, but he remarried. And this woman, she was also from money. And they then had 5 children together. And so everything seemed to be going well. But when at some point in time, Elizabeth's father and her stepmother separated. And so Elizabeth is mourning the loss of 2 moms. And she writes about this in some of her journals about how hard that was. And, some of my personal experience, my kids also had to go through the same thing, where they lost 2 moms as well. And so, I really, I can identify with Elizabeth in a lot of ways. So she although she adjusted pretty well, but when the separation happened, the stepmother pretty much disowned the 2 other children from her father, and so that was a real struggle that she had. So when she was 19 years old, she married a gentleman named William Seton, and he had done really well. His father, I can't remember what his exact background was. I think he was in shipping as well, but William was into shipping. And again, this is around 1800. So she gets married, it's 1774 plus 19, what is that? 1793, she gets married. And so so think about what's going on in the world in 1793, right? French Revolution is going on. And the American Revolution has just happened. And so the new nation is forming. And so what's going on in Europe is there's problems with the US and France, and Britain and France don't like each other, and there's all these blockades and all these people trying to disrupt shipping, and there's pirates and all this stuff. Well, what winds up happening is William's successful business starts to kind of fall apart because of some of the pirate raids and because of some of the problems with the different countries interfering with shipping from the other countries. And so, this really starts to become a problem. So they're not used to not having a lot of money. And one of the things that I guess ran in William's family was tuberculosis, and it's a lung disease. It's often fatal, but you can live with it for a time. And he often struggled with this, but he had done okay with it up to this point. But the stress of losing his business, and and the climate up in New York and near the ocean was causing problems. And so one of his friends that he was business partners with and did a lot of training with was from the Felici family in Italy. And he said, "Hey, come on over here, and maybe the Mediterranean air will help your breathing." And so William and Elizabeth and their oldest daughter Anna take a ship over, and they're going to spend some time in Italy. The other kids, their other four youngest children, stayed with her parents back here and with other relatives. So they get over to Italy, and at the time there has been this fear of a yellow fever outbreak in New York, and this is where they're coming from. So anybody with any symptoms, they're quarantining when they get to Italy. And so, even though they knew it was tuberculosis, the Italians were like, "We're not taking any chances," and they basically put him in this island prison, to quarantine him for a month. Well, during this time, William just gets worse and worse and worse, and he winds up dying. And so he leaves at the age of 29. Elizabeth's now a widow. Remember, she's lost her mom at age 3, and then she lost her stepmom when she was a teenager. And so now she's lost her husband. Okay, she's got 5 kids. And so the Felici family, they're really nice people. They're Catholics, right? Elizabeth and her family, they were Protestants. They were from some of the early roots of the Episcopalians. But she was very devout. She had a spiritual director in the Episcopalian faith. She knew her Bible and all that. But they stayed with the Felici family, and they were rich enough that they had a private chapel in their home, and they would have a priest come in and say Mass. And so one day Elizabeth kind of walks in, and they're having Mass, and she is so taken aback by the awe that the people have during this Mass. It kind of confirms some things that she kind of felt all along. She kind of always had a little bit of a affection's the wrong word, but she always kind of had a little bit of a desire to learn more about Catholicism. But at this time in America, Catholicism was all but outlawed. There had been laws against Catholics in the 1700s, and there was persecutions and all those kinds of things, and literally raid parties that come in and destroy and burn churches, Catholic churches, because people just hated the Catholics. So anyway, so she just starts to really start to comprehend and feel the presence of Jesus in the Eucharist when she spends time in this chapel, and she talks to the priest. And the priest kind of talks to her a little bit about this, and she heads back to America after several months, and within a year, she goes to the local Catholic priest and says, "I want to become Catholic." And he doesn't really try and talk her out of it, but he's like, "Are you sure? Because the persecutions are really bad over here, right? And you're running this school, you've got Protestant kids in there, and the Protestants aren't going to like it." So, she's like, "No, I can't deny that that's really Jesus in the Eucharist. And so I want to become Catholic." And he's like, "Okay," and so she becomes Catholic, and her family, who's all Episcopalian, they just lose it. They couldn't believe it. "You've betrayed us. You've turned on our family. You don't know what you're doing. You're crazy." All this kind of stuff. And she just kind of sits there and takes it, right? And they say, "You're going to lose your school." And she says, "Well, we'll see what happens." And the next time school opens up, literally nobody but her kids show up. And so all of the Protestant families pull their kids out of this school. And so along the way, she's finding out too that her husband had purchased a lot of things on credit, because they would buy things, but he was bringing money in and he would pay them off. But then when the business failed, he had a lot of things that the bills were coming due, and so they basically lost everything. And so now she's living with relatives, and they're all but homeless, especially since her relatives are kind of saying, "You're Catholic now. We don't want anything to do with you." And so she's thinking about going up to Canada. But right before she leaves, she meets this French priest. And remember, with the French Revolution, over there, if you think things are bad here during that time, they were literally dragging priests and nuns out and just killing them. They weren't even going to ask them. They had to take this oath of allegiance to the government. They didn't take it. They just take you out, put you under the guillotine, and lop your head off. And a lot of priests and religious died in France in the 1790s because of that. And so a number of the priests came over to America to escape that. And so she meets this French priest, and he has this vision of, opening schools for children here. And this really wasn't a thing at the time, but she likes the idea, and so he introduces her to the only bishop in America who's down in Baltimore. His name was Bishop John Carroll, and he, they kind of put together this thing, and the bishop really is taken aback by Elizabeth's, just her drive. The fact that she, against all odds, became Catholic, even when everybody kind of said, you're crazy to do this. But she had also had a lot of really big successes as a teacher. And so when she's talking with the French priest and with Bishop Carroll, she's like, "So is this school going to be open to everybody?" And they're like, "Sure, what do you mean?" She goes, "Like, even the poor?" And they're both kind of like, "We never really considered that, because they won't be able to pay." And she's like, "But everybody should have the availability of education." Both of them are kind of like, "It's kind of a crazy idea, but if anybody can pull it off, you can." And so he says, "We've got this." And so again, this is in Baltimore, Maryland. I don't know how much you guys know about the geography of the East Coast. Baltimore is about, 50 miles north of Washington, D.C., and about 100 miles from New York. He says, "I got this spot in Emmitsburg, Maryland, which is inland. It's at the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains. And we want you to start this there. We want you to start in order of sisters to teach." And she goes, "I'll be happy to be one of your sisters." He goes, No, we want you to run the order. And we've even written the rules for it and all this kind of stuff." And it was patterned after, you guys remember the talk I gave last year? I think it was last year, on St. Vincent de Paul, the Daughters of Charity. It was patterned after that because, again, the French priest came from France. And so he knew about this. He says it's based on that. So they call themselves the Sisters of Charity. And they're called the Sisters of Charity of St. Joseph. I think that's how they do it, because she had a real big devotion to St. Joseph. And even when before she became Catholic, and she was praying for the health of her husband, she would pray to St. Joseph. And so she really had an affinity to him. So they head to Emmitsburg. Think of it this way. This is, 25, 30 years after the United States is formed. Everything's by horseback and by, carriage and things like that. So they head to this place, and they head there in July, and it's a dump. It's really bad. It's this abandoned, larger home. I don't know if it was a school before or what it was, but they walk up and they're kind of like, "All right," and they're all kind of just standing there looking at this thing. And Elizabeth's like, "All right, let's get to work." And she just kind of inspires them. "Okay, we're going to do this. We're going to do this," and they start to whip this place into shape with the limited resources that they had. And then she goes around, and the sisters go around, and they're like going to the neighbors, and there are a lot of poor farmers in the area, and they're just offering an education to the kids. And the farmers, especially for the girls, because they were starting as a girls' school, the farmers were like, "My daughter, all she needs to know is how to cook and clean and help run the farm. She doesn't need an education." And so she had a real uphill battle with some of the farmers in the area, but she prevailed, and she offered them a free education, and they wound up bringing her like some food and milk and cheese and stuff like that to help support the school. Well, the first winter came. It was a rough winter. It was a very rough winter, and this was run by there was just like a wood stove was basically what heated the place, and they were really in bad shape. They were freezing to death. They were trying to study, and they had gloves and mittens on, and the teachers were like, "You're not going to be able to write with your mittens on," but they were so cold they just weren't making it. So she writes a letter to the bishop and says, "This new school that you guys are building, you need to get it done. because we're dying out here. And the bishop actually makes a trip out to see her and realizes how bad the situation is. And they get going on this new building. And so they get this new school built. And this is in like, I think that was the winter of 1809, 1810. And things really start to take off from there. They got a nice facility, for the time. It's still colonial times, right? It's not like they built a $70 million high school like they did down the road. It's not like that. But they're doing pretty good, and this idea is spreading, and it's attracting more women to be sisters, to be teachers, and the methods of their teaching is just really having an effect on the area. Things start to take a different turn, though. In 1812, one of her daughters, I think it was her oldest daughter, Anna, starts getting sick. And she winds up coming down with tuberculosis, which, that's what her father died of. And so it was an inherited proclivity towards tuberculosis, I guess, because they called it the family disease. And I think she's like 15 or 16 at the time. And she winds up dying. And, Elizabeth's just distraught. I mean, she's lost her husband. She's now lost her oldest daughter. Like I said before, she lost her mother. And just, kind of death has kind of surrounded her. And so she's just like, really struggling with her relationship with God. But two of the things that got her through was the Our Father. She would pray the Our Father, and she really struggled with the part where it says, "Thy kingdom come, thy will be done." She got to the point where it was hard for her to say "thy will be done" because she understood the power of those words. Where you're saying, if you're praying that prayer and you say "thy will be done," you're saying to God, "Okay, I want to try and match your will." And she understood that, but she didn't want her daughter to be gone. She didn't want her husband to be gone, and so she really struggled with that. The other thing that she read a lot was Psalm 23. You guys probably know that, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want," that psalm. That one really got her through because it talks about the Lord being with us, and even though things are tough, where He's leading us to peaceful waters and restful fields and things like that. And so those two prayers kind of really were her go-to during that time. And so again, she mourns the death of her daughter, and she keeps going. The popularity of the school spreads. They want to open a school like this in Philadelphia. They want to open one in New York. This idea starts spreading. So she sends some of her sisters, and she, to run these schools. And she is just, this is another. She's glad the schools are successful, but she loves her sisters, and she has a really difficult time sending them to go away. And so this is a trauma for her, where she's having to send her sisters. Because again, in the early 1800s, when you say goodbye to somebody, you might not see them again, because travel it was not like now. It's like, hey, we're going to go to the Twin Cities for the weekend, or we're going to go to Chicago or whatever. If you were even 100 miles away, that was a big deal, to go 100 miles. And so she just was, but she knew that this is what the Lord was calling her to do. In 1816, her youngest daughter, I think it was Rebecca, she also started getting tuberculosis. And Elizabeth knew what that meant. And she just really struggled with her relationship with God at that time. And she's like, "Lord, you've taken my husband, you've taken my oldest daughter, now you're going to take my youngest daughter?" And she just really struggled. And at this time, her two boys, William and Richard, they were like late teens, and they were like, we kind of want to go and be out in the world. And Richard, I think, wanted to go out and be in the merchant marine, like his father's business, and William wanted to be in the Navy. And they left, and she said, and in a discussion that she had with them, they basically said, "Mom, you did a great job, but we're not really following the faith. We really don't want to follow the faith." And so now Elizabeth's lost two of her daughters, died, and two of her sons are no longer following the faith. Her middle daughter, she was one of her first sisters, and she stuck with her. But kind of this death of her son's faith really affected her, because she said, Lord, how can I teach all these other children and have so much success, but yet my own children aren't part of the faith? And that's hard. It's really hard. And so, but things continue to be successful at the school. They're starting some of these schools out in Ohio and down in New Orleans. In about 1820, though, Elizabeth starts getting sick, and she's got tuberculosis now. And she knows what this means, but she's kind of got a peace about her. She's like, I've come here, I've done a lot of work, and it'll carry on. And so as she's getting sicker and sicker, one day a messenger comes and says, there's someone here to see you. She goes, well, I'm just too sick. She goes, well, it's your husband, it's your son William. And she perks up and she gets herself ready. And she goes and sees William, and he's in the chapel of the school. And she hugs him and says, William, I thought I expected you to be in the South Atlantic by now, because that's where your ship was going to sail to. And he said, Mother, I was sleeping one night. I was in my hammock, and you came to me in a dream, and you said something to the effect of, William, are you prepared for this? And I woke up, because I realized it felt like it was really you. And I said, I got out of my hammock and I was knee deep in water. And the ship had taken on water and was sinking. And I don't remember if the ship wrecked or sunk, but he survived. And he comes back and he tells her, he says, Mother, your faith was strong enough that it came and saved me. I now believe in the faith. And I want to be strong in the faith too, just like you. And so this is like a mother's dream, right? To have her son come back to the faith. And so she dies a couple months later, very peaceful. She dies at the age of 46, but she accomplished so much in that time. Her cause for canonization, everybody kind of knew, this woman's going to be a saint, but her cause for canonization wasn't started until, I think it's the 1860s or 1870s. Again, think about what's going on in America, right? There was the War of 1812, which kind of interrupted some stuff during the early part of Elizabeth's life. There was like Indian wars, there was all the expansion, and there was the Civil War. So there wasn't a lot of focus on this. Plus, at this time, there weren't any American saints. Okay, and so her story hadn't really gone too far from what was known there. But there was a bishop somewhere, and he started this cause for canonization. There were some miracles attributed to her, and it wasn't until 1963, March of 1963, when she was beatified. There was like a 4-year-old who was cured of leukemia because a Catholic, I think it was one of her sisters from her order in the future, prayed for this kid who was in a hospital with leukemia, and the kid had a miraculous cure. And then there was another couple miracles, and then they were waiting for one more miracle, and there was one bishop in particular, I can't remember his name. He was really pushing, this cause, and they just couldn't find that last miracle. And because of things like her son William's conversion and all of the people that were brought to the faith because of her schools, they decided that there was miracles that were attributed to that, and so that was what they granted as her final miracle for canonization. So she was canonized in 1975. She was the first American-born saint, or someone who was born in America. There were other saints that were Americans that were canonized, like Francis Xavier Cabrini, we talked about a couple years ago. But she was born in Italy. She became American. But Elizabeth was the first person born in America who was made a saint. And so I remember in Pope Paul's speech, in the sheet that you get with your workbooks when they come out, there's a quote by Pope Paul where he says, he basically comments on this, she is an American and she's a saint, and the America should be rejoicing because she's the first American saint, basically. And so, I would get to know her. She exuded a lot of humility, a lot of just drive all at the same time. She was one of those people like the bishop when she encountered him. She wasn't like in his face, but there was something that the bishop said, "There's something about the determination that you have that I know that you're going to do great things." And so she did. You guys have any questions? Claire?
You said she was really struggling with God when her husband died and then her daughters died and stuff. How did she get through that?
She just kept praying, and repeating that. There's a movie that was made called The Time for Miracles. It was made in 1980. And they did a really nice job of her struggle with saying, "Thy will be done" in the Our Father. And just really, it showed her inner struggle really well. But she didn't give up on God. She just kept at it. She knew that there was something in His will that she needed to follow, no matter how hard it got. So prayer.
And then was Saint Katerina, was she also born in America?
She was, but she wasn't made a saint till like 2012. Yeah, and there's a bunch now. I can't remember. There's something like 15 American-born saints now, and there's a whole bunch of blesseds right now from America, like Solanus Casey and Mazzucchelli, Stephen Mazzucchelli, and Father Tolton down in Quincy, Illinois. There's a whole bunch of blesseds. So we're going to have a whole rash of American saints here pretty soon. There was one quote that she had, and she did not have many visions. I mean, there was this dream, right? But there was one vision she had, which I find particularly interesting. She said that at some point in the future, the devil would come to every American home through a black box. So think about that. What black box is in every American home? Or a number of them, right? Phones, TVs. It was just an interesting prophecy that she had. And she said this in like the 18 teens. Okay, so she had no idea of any kind of technology that would be able to produce that. But that's all she said is this black box, the devil will come to every American home. Who knows? Right? But anyway, she left quite a legacy. She, again, basically started, along with the help of this Bishop John Carroll, the parochial school system. So this building right here that we're in may not have been here if these two visionaries would not have started this. Now, there were Catholic schools in other places, right, in Europe, those types of things, but it was never, I shouldn't say it, I don't know that it was as formal of an education as what she was doing here. And so we owe her a lot, that she was able to do this and do it well, because Bishop Carroll could have asked anybody and it could have failed because she didn't do a very good job or whatever. But this idea spread, and the idea of everybody deserves an education is really, it's a very Catholic idea, and it's something that St. Elizabeth was able to do. And so this idea of the agony in the garden, conformity to God's will. I mean, I hope you got that that's something that Elizabeth Ann Seton, that she really exemplified, is that she really, she didn't understand why, but she said, "Okay, God, thy will be done." And that became one of her monikers, right? Thy will be done, Lord. And that's really hard, okay? And I can speak from personal experience on that. In 1998, my wife, Angie, was diagnosed with colorectal cancer at the age of 32. And you don't even check for it until you're 50 years old. And I remember the morning of her surgery I got up early, and I'm not an early riser, but I was sitting in my living room and I was praying, and I wasn't that Catholic, right? I would show up to church most Sundays, and I did what I needed to do, and that's about it. But I remember this image of Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane as that one part in this in that scriptural rosary, and that "Thy will be done" came to me, right? I don't want this. Jesus is like, I don't want this, right? I mean, he knew it was good for humanity, and in his divinity he knew that. But in his humanity, he's like, this isn't going to be good. This is painful. I don't want this. But he says, "But your will be done, Father, not mine." And that image came to me, and I'm like, okay, all right, God, I'll do whatever you want, but you got to promise me you're not going to leave, right? Knowing, of course, God's not going to leave, but this is me, I'm bargaining with God, right? And so my wife, she did surgery, she did chemo, she did radiation, and yet 15 months later, the cancer was back. And at that time, I don't know if it's still the case, but at that time, if the cancer comes back, it's terminal. And she died in 2002. And so I know what Elizabeth went through losing somebody like that. I had two small kids. I had a 9-year-old and a 12-year-old. And, you're scared. You're just scared. And it's really hard. But I always remembered that morning sitting there in my living room saying, all right, God, I know that you're going to be with me. I know you're not going to leave me. And that's hard to do, because when your whole life gets turned upside down like that, and that's what happened with Elizabeth, you don't know what you're going to do, right? Normal is gone. And Elizabeth's life, like I said, she went from being rich, living in a nice place, to being poor and having basically her and her kids almost living on the street. And so it's easy to say when you pray to our Father, thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. But really think about those words in the Our Father, thy will be done. What does that mean? What does that mean? When you have a really bad day, somebody might say, how was your day? Oh, it sucked. Well, did you pray to our Father this morning? Yeah. What did it say? Thy will be done. Well, did you thank God for that? Well, no. Well, you said thy will be done. So this is God's will. So really think about what it means to pray those prayers, because there's a lot of power in that. I would encourage you to think about that. And I would also encourage you to go back and read Psalm 23, because it's a very comforting prayer. I think you'll see